blast straight from the super remote waters of the San Ignacio Lagoon, Mexico. To inspiring world of the ocean's creature. Right. Quick special favor. I'm curator today on this exciting adventure. You guys live from California. Each year, this lagoon serves as a sanctuary to magnificent gray whales, 12-mile round-trip migration between the Arctic and Mexico. And waters of the San Ignacio Lagoon, they and to nurse young. They meet up with some pretty incredible out on. Normally, it should be out on the lagoon, but as you guys can hear, it is today. We're just to the side of the lagoon. They're going to be talking to you guys about whale biology, ecology, and learn what it looks to be a whale biologist. If you're lucky, we might get to see it from pre-recorded videos that we. Just a reminder, we are in a very, very remote part of Mexico, so if this video quality a little bit, we welcome your questions. Just using the bottom of your screen or on whatever you're watching from, and we will be turning it over to our Dr. Gwen Goodmanlowe.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the not so protected San Ignacio Lagoon. So normally we'd be bouncing around out in a boat today, but because it is so windy, they've actually closed the reserve to tourists. So I am here with Dr. Gwen Goodmanlowe, marine mammal expert. And for those of you that may not know, marine mammal experts study marine mammals, seals, sea lions, dolphins, and whales. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Gwen Goodmanlowe here with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. So we are on land today because, as we said, it's blowing a lot and we can't actually, go out on the water, but we're going to have a great day talking about whales and seeing some footage of different behaviors that they do and just learning more about whales, gray whales.
So to give you an idea where we're at, we're halfway down the Baja Peninsula on the west coast, the Pacific Ocean side, and there are large lagoons here that these whales come to. So why do the whales come to these lagoons?
That's a great question. So gray whales migrate every year from about the Bering Sea all the way down to Baja, Mexico, because these lagoons are very shallow and warm and there's a higher salinity. So the mom whales like to give birth here because it's so protected. It actually protects the babies, the baby whales called calves, from sharks and killer whales, orcas. So they come in here, they give birth in January, usually January, mid to late January, and the babies are protected until they get big enough so that they can start that migration farther north again. So wonderful lagoons, really protected, relatively shallow, relatively warm water, and it's a perfect place. It's considered really a nursery for these the mom whales to give birth and start raising their young at the very beginning.
Okay, so I'm a shark guy, so please forgive my marine mammal ignorance, but this is kind of unique, right, as whales go, because most whales, people think of having to go offshore to see them. But how common is it for whales to come into nearshore areas like this? Or are gray whales kind of that different compared to all the other whales in terms of their use of nearshore areas?
Yeah, gray whales are really different because they are one of the few whale species that actually come in lagoons to give birth and have their nursery grounds. As Dr. Lowe said, most of the whales are giving birth offshore somewhere, and we don't even really know where the whales give birth. Usually, we don't know until we actually see a whale with a calf. We have no idea really where it's happening or what's going on. But with the gray whales, they are very special in that they keep these very protected in order to do that. So they're also very coastal species. So most whales are not very coastal. But gray whales feed in relatively shallow water up to about 100 feet deep, maybe a little bit deeper. And so they are considered coastal all the time. They're not pelagic, which means open ocean. So never to see them say like going to Hawaii. Like
Right.
there are blue whales. We don't really see gray whales going offshore very far, not very far. So they are always coastal whales.
So I guess the big question is, that's a long way for an animal to travel. Now I get it, why coming down here, giving birth in these lagoons, because they're so protected. that's a long way to travel. They get all the way down here. Are they eating here? What are they doing when they're in the lagoon other than giving birth to their babies?
Well, they are mating.
Okay, all right.
So
fair
there's
enough.
mating, but also what you have to remember is that baleen whales usually are migratory because their feeding location is different from their breeding location. So toothed whales and dolphins like orca, sperm whales, any kind of whale that has teeth, they don't have to migrate because their food is usually fish and they're finding their food all the time. But with baleen whales, what happens is, like I said, their food is actually really concentrated in an area, so they have to go to that area. And usually it's in the north, so like gray whales, it's in the Bering Sea. Well, you're not going to be giving birth in the Bering Sea in wintertime because it's way too cold. So they feed in the summertime in the Bering Sea. Then in the winter they come down and they give birth and they mate down here. Do they feed down here? There is some evidence that they are doing some feeding. Historically, that didn't really happen, and that could be related to climate change and the fact that they're not getting as much food and putting on as much fat as they used to in the north of the Bering Sea. So now they do a little bit of kind of not scavenging, but kind of, extra feeding while they're down here.
So as baleen whales go, so we think of blue whales, we think of humpbacks. Those are the ones people typically think of in the water column. They'll create these bubble curtains, right? And they corral their prey, but gray whales feed differently, right?
They do. And first of all, let's go back for a second. So blue whales do not do the bubble
Okay,
feeding.
all right. No. Sorry,
Shark biologist.
sorry.
So
Shark
blue
biologist.
whales do not do that. They're filter feeders, so they're skimming.
But in the water column.
Yeah,
Yeah.
humpback whales are the only ones that actually make the bubble nets and corral their prey, usually herring and small fish, in a bubble net. It scares them, and then they come up through it and they, grab it. But gray whales do feed differently. They're the only whale that actually feeds off the bottom. They feed in the mud, and they're feeding on small things called mysid shrimp and amphipods. And it's really cool. Nobody really knows how this started, but typically they like to feed on their right side. So they'll turn over on their right side. They suck mud up in there. They kind of spit the mud out. They get the prey, the mysids and the amphipods stuck on their baleen, use their tongue to scrape the baleen, and then they swallow it, but they're spitting the mud out. And the reason why we know they do it on the right side, way before, there were cameras, underwater cameras, we could see it. We knew that because when there was a gray whale that they caught or it washed up, the baleen on the right side is much shorter. It's all worn down. So it's like your fingernails, made of something similar to your fingernails. And so it gets all worn down because that mud is really coarse and it just wears it down.
So that's why my teeth on the right side are worn down because they chew on the right side.
Yeah,
Is that-
exactly,
okay.
exactly.
All right.
They're filter feeding on the right side. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So, but then they have to be eating a lot.
they do
right?
eat a
So,
lot. Yeah.
so when they're up north and it's so productive, they're eating like probably billions of amphipods. How much weight do they have to put on for this migration down south?
That's a good question. They put on a lot of weight. So I don't know the exact number, but you may know.
No, I don't.
Okay, so they put on many pounds, and they store their energy in their blubber. And basically, what they're doing is like a lot of animals, they are kind of not really feeding off their blubber, but they're using that blubber over the course of the year. They're metabolizing their blubber for energy. And so they'll start out really fat at the end of the summer before they start migrating. And then the blubber gets metabolized and they're using that as energy stores as they come down here, maybe doing a little feeding on the way, maybe a little feeding down here, but they're not putting on that much fat. And remember, the other part of that is that the moms have to convert that fat to very fat rich milk for their babies. So the moms have to get really big, store a lot of that fat, and their milk fat is actually about 53%, which is about 2% higher than human milk fat.
Wait, so when I'm drinking 2% milk,
Yeah.
they're drinking
53% milk. And baby gray whales can put on about 9 pounds per hour.
per hour.
Per hour.
That's pretty efficient.
About 50 to 60 pounds per day. And so they're feeding off the mom, who's really not really feeding herself. So her energy that she's giving to the calf is coming from her blubber stores. So that's why it's very critical for her to put on as much fat, as much blubber, feed as much as she can in the Bering Sea in the summertime.
So now that blubber serves another role, right? So it's energy source. So that's an energy bank for
Right,
them while they
right.
make that migration. But they're also living in the Arctic waters
They are.
in the summer, granted, but it's still pretty cold.
Yeah.
And the water here is not terribly warm.
That's right.
So how do marine mammals stay warm?
Well, there's a number of ways. One of the ways that they stay warm is having this really thick blubber layer. So a lot of marine mammals have fur. Some have fur, some have blubber, some have fur and blubber. For instance, sea otters only have fur. They don't have any blubber. But whales don't have fur. They just have blubber. And blubber is an amazing source of thermoregulation. So keeping warm, it's really very, very efficient. The drawback to that is that they don't swim as well as an animal that doesn't have blubber, because it really actually makes them very buoyant and it kind of slows them down a little. So in order to make them not as buoyant, they actually have very oily bones. So it's kind of a cross between, I want to stay up at the surface because remember, these are marine mammals, so they have lungs. They have to breathe air. They're not fish with gills. So the trade-off is I need to get to the surface to breathe air, but I also need to be able to get down to the bottom to feed. And so the crossover there is a lot of blubber to stay warm, be buoyant, but also oily bones to kind of stay down in the water column, to be able to get down without a lot of energy.
So along those lines, because they're a coastal whale, they're not like deep divers like sperm whales. So how often does it come to the surface to breathe?
They breathe about every 3 to 5 minutes. They come to the surface about every 3 to 5 minutes, especially for the calves, but they can stay down for about 30 minutes.
30
if they
minutes.
want to. So when they're feeding, they can actually be down there for about 30 minutes. And that's not that long compared to other marine mammals. So for example, sperm whales are down for an hour. Elephant seals can be down for 60 to 90 minutes. So 30 minutes sounds like a lot to us. I mean, I can only hold my breath for about 2 minutes. But as far as marine mammals go, it's not super long. And that's again, because they're coastal feeders. So they don't have to, go really deep down like sperm whales do to get their prey.
So that whole concept of staying close to the surface, also probably water's warmer close to the surface, so they're
Yeah.
losing less energy
Right.
due to that. But I also heard that their metabolism, because we're mammals, we're endotherms, so our bodies are warmer than the water we move through. I study primarily ectotherms. Their bodies are the same temperature as the water.
Right.
But the way we stay warm is we burn a lot of calories,
That's right.
But they actually have a lower metabolism than humans.
They do. And part of the reason is they have that such a big blubber layer. They don't need, like, we don't have anything. Like, we have all to have relatively little fur.
And that's
right?
why you're cold right now.
And that's why I'm cold right now. Little fat, right? So we don't have the ability to stay warm like they do. So they actually stay really warm. So their metabolism is lower, and that's that they don't burn as much energy, right? So yeah.
So, but then in terms of feeding, that means if they eat a lot, that's more bank.
Yeah.
So
okay,
then
yep.
that's putting
Yeah,
it into
yeah,
that blubber
yeah.
layer.
And their body temperature is actually really similar to ours. It's about 99 degrees. So Fahrenheit, and ours is 98.6, although they're altering that estimation now. But ours is about 98.6. So their body temperature, internal body temperature, is actually very similar to ours.
That's amazing, right? So that keeps that cost down.
Right.
So, but as they swim, so when we think of structures for swimming, I'm used to a shark where the tail would be going like this. Their tail fluke actually is going up and down.
That's correct.
And then how do these fins work?
So these are not called fins in marine mammals; they're
Okay.
flippers. So here we have a gray whale little demonstration here. So here's the mouth. So baleen whale mouths are very different looking. They're crazy, little crazy, because they have a really strongly arched jaw, and then the baleen is always coming down just from the upper jaw right there. I don't know if you can see that. The baleen only comes down from the upper jaw. And so when they're swimming, what they're doing is, they're swimming along, and the tail fluke goes up and down like that. They actually have very tall projections off their vertebrae, and that's so that they have two types of muscles. They're called epaxial muscles and hypaxial muscles. So most animals, or with us, like when we move our leg, we're pushing it down, and then it goes up on its own. They actually have to have muscles that pull the tail fluke back up. So it's very efficient, because instead of just a thrust going down and then comes back up, they actually are thrusting down and thrusting up, right? So it's double the speed and
Right.
double the power of a normal animal, or like what humans would do.
So now we saw them yesterday when it wasn't so windy. and they were kind of cruising along, and they'll do that weird logging thing where they just kind of lay there. But they can generate a lot of force.
They can.
They can actually breach.
They can.
So I think we have some footage of breaching. Okay, so in addition, they'll also do something called fluking. What is fluking?
Okay, so fluking is basically when a whale, and all whales do this, when they're about to take a deep dive. So they kind of go like this. Remember, okay, we need to talk about breathing
Oh, yeah.
too, but we'll get back to that in a second. So their blowholes are at the top of their forehead, and that's so that, like with us, when we're swimming, we have to kind of put our heads up like this. So whales, dolphins, seals and sea lions, they have their nostrils are going to be right in the front or on the top, and that way, if here's the water, they don't actually have to put their head way up. They just kind of go up, take a breath, and go down. When they're about to take a deep dive, which is also called sounding, so they're going through the water like this, and then right before they do a deep dive, that tail fluke will come up.
So it's out of the water.
So it's out of the water, and that indicates that they're going to take a deep dive and be down for a few more minutes.
I think we have some fluking footage too, right?
So I wanted to talk about the flippers on the side here. So Dr. Lowe asked me, what do these flippers on the side do? They're actually involved in steering. So kind of like a plane, an airplane. So they're using the caudal fluke for propulsion, but they're not like rowing these at all. So they're not going like that at all, right? So they kind of put them out and they put them back against their body. They can thermoregulate by keeping their flippers close to the body. They can down by moving them out, but they're actually using them more like for steering a little bit.
So can they turn them, rotate them?
They can rotate them a little bit, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So they can generate some lift.
Yeah, but mainly it's propulsion. Yeah. So I did want to talk about the globals for a second. So I said that they were mammals, they have lungs, they do breathe, in the air. But so the toothed whales and dolphins have two tubes coming up from their lungs, just like we do. We have two nostrils coming up. The toothed whales and dolphins have one blowhole. So those two tubes come together to form one blowhole. With gray whales and all the baleen whales, I don't know if you can see that on there, but they have two holes. So their tubes are still coming up to two holes. And when they dive down, they have to hold their breath, and they have muscles that contract those little holes right there, and they close them. Can you see that?
So that's how they're basically holding their breath.
Right. So they're actually closing up those nostrils, and also so because they have these two tubes that are coming out, when they exhale at the surface, so just like us, if you dive, you take a little dive, you're swimming, you dive down, you get to the top, you have to go like that. So we usually do it through our mouths, right? They don't do it through their mouths, they're doing it through their blowholes. And what happens is, because there's two of them, if you are right in front of the whale or right behind the whale, because the spray that's coming out comes out like that, it actually looks like a heart-shaped blow.
No way.
Yeah, way. So happy Valentine's Day.
Free mammals.
So yeah,
Of course they have heart.
of course they do. So they have this heart-shaped blow, but also it's not just air. So when we exhale after we're diving, it's basically carbon dioxide and a little bit of moisture is coming out. For them, they actually have oil in there, a little bit of oil, and so it's a kind of an oily exhalation. And so if you're ever, if we were on the whale watch boat and we were, behind it and we got that on us,
I got some in my face.
it does feel a little oily. It smells a little fishy. It's not fishy because, it has to do with the stomach at all, because the stomach and the respiratory system are not connected whatsoever, but it is oily. And so people think it smells a little fishy. I did want to talk also about, their mouths, because their mouths are really cool. So I did talk about the baleen coming down from the top. But the thing about it is this is super cool. When they are feeding, and this is more for the plankton feeders, not so much the gray whales as much, because again, they're feeding on the bottom and they're taking in mud. But the other baleen whales, because they're trying to get in as much water with plankton and small fish as possible, their tongue actually turns inside out. So instead of being rounded like that, when they take in the water, it flips over and it looks like a scoop. And that allows them to take in as much water as they can. And then they push the tongue back up like that. It forces the water out through the baleen, and that's how it captures the
It's
food.
just swallow.
Yeah. So they also have these things
Yeah,
called
what are those plates?
these are called gular pleats right here. And gray whales only have about 2 to 4, whereas the baleen whales that are eating large quantities or swallowing large quantities of water, not really swallowing, but getting large quantities of water in their mouth, their throat has to expand really big. So they'll have, like humpback whales have many, many, many of these pleats. But because they're not getting, gray whales aren't getting as much, water in there, they only have a couple pleats to expand. But the thing is that people think that those are almost like gills where
Yeah.
the water is coming out of there. The water is not coming out of there. The water, they're forcing that out of their mouth with their mouth closed to the baleen.
Right.
Okay.
So those, they're dainty eaters.
They're dainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, very dainty.
Now, what about these zits on its head? What are
Okay.
those?
Well, I was going to talk about the eyes first, but we'll talk about
Okay.
these zits in a second because they do have eyes. Okay. So
They're small.
they're relatively small,
Okay.
but they're actually really large. They're like this big. The eye is like that big, but
The animal's like
right,
30
right,
feet
exactly.
long.
So what does that tell you, shark biology?
They have little eyes.
Why? What does that tell you about?
Vision's probably not super.
There you go. Okay, so they don't really. Why do they need vision?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so they're going down to the mud. They're not looking for individual fish or individual prey in their mud. Right. They're just saying, oh, that's a muddy bottom.
Yeah.
So they don't really, and then they're just scooping it up. Right. They're sucking it up with their mouths. So they don't actually really need to have good vision. And in fact, their vision is not great. It's probably their least developed sense. Well, actually, that's not true. The sense of smell is the least developed
Okay.
sense because when they're on the surface, they're not really smelling anything. They're taking a breath, they're going back down. So smell is the least developed sense. And then their eyes are not really that good. Taste also not really that good. So their sense
Based on what they eat, I can see that.
yeah, right, exactly. So all right, let's get back to the sits on their
Yeah.
on their
What are the
head.
zits on the head?
Okay, so gray whales are really special because they have two other organisms that live on their bodies. And one of them, which you can see here, are these little white spots. Those actually are depicting barnacles. So gray whales are the only species that are known to have another species that is specific to them. So there's a
So
species.
they have their own barnacle.
They have their own species of barnacles. The barnacles are super cool. So the barnacles will, we'll do a little life cycle of the barnacles. There's a couple stages they go through to become adults, but one of the stages when they're not adults are free swimming larvae, which they're swimming around in the ocean. So when the barnacles reproduce, the larvae are swimming around the ocean, and right at the same time that the baby gray whales are born, the larvae are now old enough to settle down on the baby gray whale. So at first, when the baby gray whales are born, they're black and they are smooth. There's nothing on them. And then when they're first born, you see tiny little barnacles that are going to grow, and the barnacles grow bigger and bigger, and they kind of grow together, and they get these bigger spots on them, and they live with the gray whale, with that gray whale, their entire life until the barnacle falls off and dies. And that sometimes happens. They get scraped off in the mud, but also very safe.
So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So are the mom's barnacles the ones that are producing larvae?
It
Or
doesn't
are they
matter.
coming from any?
They're coming from not anywhere, because they're specific to the gray whales,
Right,
right? So
right.
other gray whales barnacles.
No,
Yeah. So
I-
not just the mom.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, she's probably the big contributor because she's close to the baby all the time.
Well, except for because
Those barnacles have a long larval stage.
yeah, because the around in the larvae, right? So they're not. I mean, they're
Because this thing's littered with gray whales.
yeah, but they're going. The barnacle larvae are going with the current, so it's not going to hop on. The timing is off,
Okay.
right? Because they're
All right,
whatever.
I
Okay.
didn't know mom
Yeah.
was sharing here.
No,
So
but-
have some of my skin lice.
But she is
She
sharing
is.
the skin lice, not the barnacles. So so the little orange dots around those barnacles are actually called whale lice, and whale lice live on other whales, so they're not specific just to gray whales. But the whale lice are movable and they walk around. And in fact, if you ever get to to touch a gray whale, you probably will get some whale lice on your hands because they are moving around. And the reason why you see the pattern around the barnacle right there is because they use the barnacle to kind of latch on. So it helps them stay on because remember, the whale is going through the water. But the whale lice are really important because what they do is they pick off the dead skin.
Oh.
So as the skin gets scraped and it's, we lose our skin cells every 24 hours, they're losing skin cells too. And so they actually help keep the whale skin clean and smooth. And if the whale gets an injury, they will actually pick at the dead skin around the injury and help clean that injury up. So kind of like a Band-Aid. They're like
They're
whale
cool.
lice Band-Aid. But they can live on other whales. So they're not specific to gray whales, but they're very important to whales.
So the reason why I ask is when we were out yesterday, we saw this weird thing. They stick their heads out of the water. What do you call that?
That's called spy hopping.
Kylie, I'm pretty sure we have some good footage. All right, so why do they do it?
Okay.
It's really cool.
That is the question of the century. So back in the day, they used to think that spy hopping was so that the whales could see where they were going to navigate. Because remember, they are coastal. So they are relatively close to the coast when they're migrating from the north down here and when they're migrating from the south up to the north. So they used to think they were like popping their heads up, looking at the navigation systems. Oh, look, there's a cove right there. I know where I am now.
But you said they have bad eyesight.
But they have bad eyesight. So now they're not actually really sure because the other thing too is that a lot of times when they're coming up out of the water, their eye is still under the water. So they're not always putting their head all the way up. So then that theory is questionable. Some oceanographers came up with an idea and they think that the closer the whale gets to the surface, their ear, they do have an ear. They don't have an external ear hole like we do. But their ear is embedded in their blubber, in their skull. It's actually way deep in there. So they actually can still sense vibrations in the water. So now they think, oceanographers came up with this idea that the closer they get to the surface, the more they can hear waves hitting the shore and things like that. So they think it's more of sound. But the thing you have to remember is yesterday we saw a lot of spy hopping. They're not migrating right now. So it can't just be for navigation. And so it could just be a curiosity thing. They're hearing the boat engines. They're coming up. They're getting like get a better feel or better, whatever feel with their ears for the boats and where they are. So it could be that because remember their eyesight is not great.
Now, yesterday when we were out, we did see a lot of animals, kind of like tubes and trees. A lot of animals have displays, especially during mating season, right? The males are trying to make themselves look really cool to get a female to mate with them. Spy hopping factor into any of them?
Maybe we don't really know. That's not really a theory, but it could be. They could be looking for mates.
Right.
So
But the male that sticks his head highest out of the water is the coolest. Or
that you don't know if that was a male, do you?
True. All right.
So
But
it's not like with sharks where you
Okay.
can really see real easy. It's very hard to tell the difference between a male and a female whale of certain species,
Okay.
especially this one.
although
Yes. Yeah,
there are times when you
true.
can tell.
that's true.
Sorry.
That is true.
And this is the season,
That
right?
is true.
So do we have any mating footage or courtship footage, Kylie?
So let's talk about mating for
Yeah, let's.
shall we? Okay, so first of all, it always goes back to that they're mammals, so they're breathing air, right? So when they're mating, that they actually have to stay near the surface, so they have to be able to breathe air. And so when they're mating, it's typically going to be one female and few males. So the smallest mating group you're going to see is one female and 2 males. And the way they figure out who's going to mate with her is there's a dominant male. So it's usually larger, maybe stronger, maybe he has longer male reproductive parts.
Okay.
And so they figure it out. The 2 males figure it out who's the dominant one, and then the other one is the subordinate male, and he will actually help keep it towards the surface so that she can breathe while they're mating. And then mating takes place. Gray whales actually have a 6-foot-long penis. Let's just put it right out there.
And what color is it?
It's bright pink.
Okay.
And so
All right.
a lot of times during the season, what we'll see is we'll see some males that are vying for dominance and they're laying there with their 6-foot-long penises hanging
Okay.
out, just, whatever. And it's not the female who chooses actually. So in some species, it's the female who chooses.
Right.
Okay, peacocks,
Right.
like you're actually male determine their, parts and size and everything, and then they will mate with the female.
But females will mate with more than one male.
They can mate with more than one male, but typically it's just that dominant male. Yeah,
And they only give birth to one calf.
they have give birth to one calf, and the reason is because they just don't have the energy. Remember, they're stored energy.
Right.
They don't have the energy to give birth to more than one. There have been known to be twins in other species, but the twin always dies. The one always dies because she can only really nurse one calf at a time. And so she'll give birth down here, and then she will, the baby, the calf will drink milk from the mom for 7 to 8 months. And then she's like, okay, I'm done. I can't give you any more milk. So you're off on your own. And then the calf has to learn how to feed.
So is that when they exit the lagoon, or are they still nursing?
They're still nursing all the way back. So they're giving birth about in January approximately. And then they're going to start heading back towards the females with calves stay here the longest.
Okay.
Because they're trying to get the babies big enough and strong enough to make that 7,000-mile migration back. So they're going to stay here until the bitter end, which is mid to late March, and then they're going to start heading back. The ones that don't have calves are going to start heading back in February. So they've mated. So, females without calves and males are going to come down first. They're going to mate, and they're going to start heading back so that they can get to this.
So the pregnancy is how long?
About 13 and a half months.
Okay, so that means that female have to take a year off.
They have to take a year off. So
Okay.
they give birth, some reports say every 2 years. That's pretty rare. It's usually every 3 because, it's over a year of gestation. And then it's 8 months in addition to that. So then you're up to 21 months of having a calf. So that's a minimum of 2 years. And then she's got to get back down. So usually it's more like every 3 years.
So everybody's making the journey.
No, that is actually not true. So they're not all making the journey every year because
Okay.
why would they come down here if they don't have right? So there's actually some that don't make the journey every year, but also there's kind of not a new population, but they're studying a population of about 210 whales that don't come all the way down here, and they don't go all the way back up there. So they're actually feeding off the coast of Oregon and California, and they'll come down here, but they're actually not going all the way north to the Bering Sea.
So,
Yeah.
so in other populations, we call that sort of phenomenon like partial migration. Not everybody
Right,
does it,
right.
but for enough of the population, it's important enough to do that way.
Right.
So is that based on the population increase? Because these whales, including all whales, were hunted to the verge of extinction by the early 1900s. How the population stopped?
Well, that's a really good question. So let's get back to the first part, and that is there is some competition for food, and so that's why they think some of them are not going all the way to sea. Their populations have been oscillating. They're between 2019 and 21. There was something known as a UME, which is unusual mortality event, which they think was related to food source, because what happened was they weren't getting enough food to make the migration, and so they're actually starving to death. They are rebounding since then. They have been rebounding. They're coming back up. So they've determined that mortality event is now over. But the problem is that according to the data that they're taking here, there were only 22 females with calves last year, whereas in the past I think it was in 2015, there were over 200 females with calves, so female calf pairs.
Right.
Last year, there were only 22 female with calves.
So, we get these big events, these climate events, right? That are common, right? So we get these oscillations between El Ninos and La Ninas. When we get these El Ninos, it makes the water really warm. How does that affect, first of all, their migration? Does it affect their survival?
Yeah, definitely affects their survival because remember, so one of the things, well, and also going to climate change, not just El Nino, is their prey are dependent on the sea ice cover. So the sea ice cover allows for phytoplankton to grow, and then their prey are eating the phytoplankton. So huge numbers of these amphipods and mysid shrimp are there. When the sea ice melts, the whole ecosystem is destroyed. There's not enough for them to eat. They can't put those fat stores on, and they are going to be starving. So, whereas I think about it in 2019, I was at the beach in Malibu just for the day, a few hours, and I saw something I've never seen in my life, and hopefully I'll never see again, although it was very cool. We're like, what's that in the surf? And we saw like a tail, like right in the surf. And I was like, that is so strange. These gray whales should not be in the surf. They were feeding off Malibu Beach because they were starving.
Yeah.
They could not make the migration back. It was March. They could not make it back without feeding. And we were finding, them starving and, washed up on shore and emaciated and things like that. So climate change does definitely affect these gray whales because the whole ecosystem variously changes and they're not.
So we went from a period where we were hunting these animals pretty extensively. There's big whale fisheries. What was that for? I mean, what were whales hunted for?
So whales were hunted for their blubber, which they used to make oil. And other whales were hunted for other things. Great whales are baleen whales, and they used the baleen to make what they call whale bone, which back in the day, women had to wear corsets. And so they needed something flexible in that corset, right? So they didn't have plastic back then. So they used whale bone. They used whale bone in umbrellas, the seas that are in umbrellas. But we didn't have electricity back then, so they boiled the oil down and they made candles and oil to light street lamps and things like that. So, but we don't do that anymore. So, luckily for the whales, we don't really have to hunt them in order to do that.
And they basically hunted them out.
They did.
Less than 80 years.
Yeah. I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
So, one of my favorite stories, not favorite, but one of my favorite stories that I used to tell my students about the elephant seals, which also were hunted down to whales, is whenever they would find one, when people would find them, you'd think, oh, let's save them. There's only 10 seals left. Instead of saving them, you'd be like, oh, look, there's one left. Let's kill it. So, so that's the problem, right? Back then, we didn't have that mentality. We had the mentality of, oh, there's one. We could get money for the oil. Let's kill it. Let's not. Yeah. But going back to the first part of what we were talking about with San Ignacio, one of the most amazing things about this place is that these gray whales were actually called devilfish because we hunted them almost to extinction, and they got mad. They fought back, and so they would attack the whalers. Okay, in 100 years, the tides turned. We started protecting them, and now they like us. They actually like us, and the reason why I can say that is because there is no other species in the world where the mom does not protect their babies. You think about the cats, giving birth to kittens, dogs, and puppies. That mom will actually, if you try to come near those animals, that mom will do whatever she can do. Get you away. She'll bite you, growl, whatever animal you're talking about. But with gray whales, they actually will bring their calves up to the boat and they will lift the calf up so that people can actually touch the whale and interact with the whale. That is a turnaround in like less than 100 years that is unheard of. And that's why this lagoon is so special.
We're lucky they're forgiving.
We're lucky they're
So
forgiving.
finally, we have some footage back. This is really what we wanted you to see. Unfortunately, we couldn't be out in the water today, but check out this footage. So obviously, having a whale, being able to touch a whale's experience, right?
Yeah.
It's truly spectacular.
Right.
It's one of the things that makes this place so special.
Right.
So, but the thing is it's easy to get discouraged, right? So we have to remind our audience that we decimated these animals.
Right.
Then we put in protections, and they've come back. In fact, gray whales were on the endangered species list.
Sure.
They came off.
They did. Yeah. So they were doing well enough that they were able to be downgraded to a threatened species instead of endangered species, which is a conservation success story.
Right. Right.
However, you know, we have to go back to, I think we want to be positive about it, but we have to remember that with climate change, that is going to affect it negatively. Now, the good thing about gray whales is that they can be opportunistic feeders. So even though they have their preferred prey, they can feed on other things, but those other things may not give them as much fat as they need to make it down here, right? And to survive that year.
So it's good being flexible.
Good.
And try to eating different things. So,
Yeah, true.
so we're probably to the time where we can start taking questions. So I'm sure some of you have some really cool questions for Buff.
All right, everyone. We do have a couple questions coming in. Since we were just talking about the mothers and babies, Julie wants to know, how do the female whales know that they're pregnant? And then therefore, how do they know to stay in the lagoon?
Oh my, that is a
Wait, do they have those little EPT tests?
really good question. I don't know how they know, but somehow they know. So there are hormonal changes. They must know that there's something growing inside them. And so it's just an innate thing that, you know, that evolved over time for them to come down to these and then, you know, and then there's learning. So, you know, they probably followed each other, but somehow innately they know that they're pregnant. That is an amazing question.
So they start eating more secret pictures.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and it's an ice cream. Yeah.
All right.
So more questions.
Hopefully you guys can hear me. It is so windy where I am right now. The next question is from Hallie. Hallie wants to know, how long do gray whales live?
Oh, that's a great question. So there was one that was known to live up to 80 years. But so in general, they say about 55 to 80 years, but on average, it's really more like 30 to 40. And that's once they get to, because remember, when they're calves, there's a high mortality rate. It's very hard for them to make it all the way back to the Bering Sea and then learn how to feed on their own and things. High mortality rate for calves, but in general, we're going to say, you know, 30 to 40 years, and then the max has been that they've counted has been 80 years.
That's pretty high, right? I mean, some whales live to be a couple hundred years old,
Over
right?
200 years
200
old, right?
years old.
Bowhead whales over 200 years old, right?
How do they know that?
They know that from looking at their eyes. So, well, for one thing, they can see rings in the eyes, like rings on a tree. But the reason why they found that for bowhead whales originally was because they found harpoon embedded in a bowhead whale that hasn't been used for 200 years. It's a over 200-year-old harpoon tip that there's no way, you know, that it could have been in there. But then they started doing, you know, scientific research, and they found rings in the eyes, and they could determine how aging from that. Yeah. So
Very
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Great question.
Very cool.
Any more?
Yeah. We want to know, how can anyone that's interested in this stuff become a whale biologist? How can you do what Gwen gets to do?
Oh. Okay, that's so it's not easy, but it's not that hard. So the first thing you need to do is you need to study up on your math and your chemistry. And the reason why I say that is because those are the courses that actually enable you to get into biology at the university level. But you don't actually have to get a degree in biology. You can go another route. So one way is to get a degree in biology, marine biology, go on for your master's and PhD. But there's plenty of people that don't do that. They start out like in high school doing going to places where they're volunteering and doing internships, and they become whale watch biologists. So they'll be a docent on a boat. To summer jobs, they'll go on a boat and they'll be a summer naturalist, and then they just do it that way. And so you don't really have to go the whale biologist route if you want to do just this part, which is being out in the water and, you know, getting to see whales all the time.
So really, it's the difference between if you're interested in doing research,
Right.
versus I just love learning about whales and I want to share that with other people. And we need people that do both. So, what was your route? How'd you go?
So my route was I majored in marine biology. I taught outdoor ed on Catalina Island. I got my master's degree. I got my PhD.
But it wasn't working with marine mammals.
My master's degree was working with corals, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it was very hard to get into a program with marine mammals. And then I went to Hawaii, worked on the Hawaiian monk seal, the endangered Hawaiian monk seal, and then ended up getting a job where I was the marine mammalogist.
That's right. You're a poop picker.
I was a poop picker,
Yeah,
yes.
she
I
picked
picked so not very glamorous, a little bit smelly, lots of flies, but
Don't
No.
put it in the freezer.
no, don't put it in the
Not next to
freezer.
my ice cream.
Exactly. But kind of detective work. So you just have to, you kind of have to go with the flow, and whatever opportunity arises, that's what you go with.
Very cool. I think I want to be a whale biologist now. You guys were just talking about climate change and kind of the die-off that the whales saw and then how they're starting to come back. Grant wants to know what protections does both the Mexican and the US governments have in place to protect whales?
So there's the Marine Mammal Protection Act to start with, and that was formed in 1973. And that is that you can't kill a whale unless you have a permit. But in the United States, you can't kill whales at all. There's certain countries that are still whaling, but certain whales are protected species. In Mexico, the government deems the gray whale a protected species on top of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so actually in the lagoons, the fishermen ones that decided to start the protection and start this ecotourism. And it's really actually amazing because they're very serious about it. And when they go up to a whale, if they see a whale that they know is friendly and they go up to a whale, they will self-regulate, but they will stay on the whale for only 20 minutes at a time. And they will only allow 2 boats, and they self-regulate that. So they're like, you stay off, we're on this whale for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, they say, your turn, and they go, that boat, that ponga goes off and looks for another whale. So they're very serious about not interfering with the whale's behavior or anything like that. And there's certain areas of the lagoon. So in this lagoon, there's actually a reserve, and you have to, there's a gatekeeper there, and he only allows 16 boats in at a time. So if there's more than 16 boats, he says you have to wait. And that's what happened to us yesterday when we were on the water. We actually had to wait maybe 45 minutes before we could get back into the reserve. So, and the fishermen are the ones that started all this, and they're the ones that are really controlling it, and they're very serious about protecting the whales.
And I think really that's the key to conservation success, right? You can legislate, you can mandate, you can force all you want, but it really takes people like you who say this is important and we want to learn about the animals, we want to see the animals, maybe get an experience with the animals, but we don't want that to have an impact. So all these things that these countries are doing are the reasons why whales have come back.
Right.
And I think that means we've been doing something right. Climate change, that's going to be a tougher problem, and it's going to require everyone on the planet, not just what we're doing here in Mexico or what they're doing in the US.
But not only climate change, but pollution, right? Because
Absolutely.
a lot of these whales, not great whales as much, but a lot of the whales like baleen whales, even tooth whales, you know, they find them they're starving, and they're like, why are they starving? And when they open them up, when they do what they call a necropsy, they find that their stomach is filled with plastic. And so it's like, you know, oh, I have a water bottle, I'm going to throw it in the trash, I'm going to throw it on the ground. Every single person makes a difference, and we have to be better about getting rid of the single-use plastics, all those kinds of things, because that is also killing all these animals.
All right, next question. We want to hear a little bit more about whale evolution. So let's go way back in time. How did whales evolve?
Okay, wow. Okay, now you're really going in my brain and deep recesses of my brain here. Okay, so whales actually came from a hippopotamus-like animal. It was not a hippo, but it was something similar to that about 350 million years ago. For whatever reason, whatever there was competition on land, they started moving back into the ocean. And so over time, their flippers became their limbs, not arms, their arms and legs, like, you know, they were hippo kind of like animal, started to get flat so that they could swim. So very slowly, their limbs became flippers. Tail, instead of being long and pointy, became flattened so that also helped them swim. They still let them breathe air. So unlike other animals that moved back into the ocean and lungs became gills, they actually never went to gills. They always had to breathe air. Their snouts and face, think of a got a smushed face, became elongated. The nostrils that were on the front of the hippo like animal moved up to either the top, like here in seals and sea lions, or on the, like I said, on the forehead. And so that happened over millions and millions and millions of years. And so we have fossil evidence of all these different stages in marine mammals' lives as they evolved and became, then they speciated.
And they get bigger, right?
They've gotten bigger. So they started out pretty small, and then they've gotten bigger over time. And that's, that's just part of evolution.
So the biggest animal on the planet.
Is the blue whales. Way bigger than any dinosaur that ever.
See, so on our planet are these massive animals, whales, structure cooler, but hey,
That's not cool. Okay, one other thing about that though is that people kind of think that that because hippos had teeth, the first whales who evolved were the toothed whales and dolphins, and then the baleen whales evolved from there. And actually, they have fossil evidence that shows that weirdly, the baleen whales evolved first, and the whales evolved from them, which I don't really understand. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. That to me is crazy, but that's what they say. So.
I personally think that we need some of these students to go out and become evolutionary biologists, and then they can answer those questions for us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, we have a little bit more time for a couple more questions. We also want to know, how do whales protect their young from predators?
Okay, so great whales are in these lagoons where the predators you're not going to find the predators, the big predators. It is difficult for gray whales to protect their calves when they're migrating from basically killer whales. So killer whales hunt in packs. They live in a family unit. They communicate with each other, and they are very, very good at hunting in packs. So what they do is they will actually try to separate the mom and the calf, and then they will essentially drown the calf. Remember, they have to breathe air. So the mom is just going to stay with the calf as much as she can, try to buoy it up, keep it to the surface, but it's actually very difficult to protect a gray whale calf from killer whale packs hunting. Other whales will, they just stay with them. It's the same kind of thing. They just try to stay with them. Sperm whales are really cool because they have some marguerite formation where if there are, say, pilot whales that are in the area, or another whale, their species is injured, what they do is they will lay on the surface where they'll be vertical, and they will surround the calf, baby calf, or the injured animal, and they will surround it, kind of forming a wall around that calf so that nothing can actually get in there. But sperm whales are the only ones that are known to do that marguerite formation. So the other ones are just trying to keep them away from predators.
All right. Well, on that slightly
Great questions.
Really good questions.
Really amazing questions.
really good question. On that slightly sad note, let's go for our final question, which is one that always comes through. It's always very sweet. Emma wants to know, do whales have feelings?
Oh, of course they do. They're mammals. They have large brains. They're very intelligent. They definitely have feelings. Do we know what those feelings are? No. Can we understand the feelings? Not really. They don't cry. They don't have tears. Do they feel sadness? Well, we do know that there are certain species of dolphins, for example, that if their calf is born stillborn, they will actually stay with the calf and try to keep the calf towards the surface for as much as, I think it's been over 20 days for certain species, where they are trying to keep that calf alive or bring it back to life. So we know that they definitely have feelings. Do they have anger? Well, we know that they used to attack the whaling ships, right? So yeah, they have anger, probably sadness, happiness. Maybe that's what the spy hopping is. And the breaching, they're like, woohoo, look at us. Woo, we need to get rid of some energy. We're having so much fun. So yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you, Gwen and Chris. That is all the time that we have left for today. Thank you guys so much, despite the iffy weather that we're having out here right now, for tuning in and answering all of our questions. For the viewers, thank you all for tuning in. If any questions come up after the show, please feel free to send them to us. We'll do our best. I won't, but I'll have Gwen and Chris do their best to answer those questions for you guys. And until next time, we'll see you guys on our next live stream.